So I mentioned in the guided meditation, that we use this term object in the meditation instructions, object of attention. An object really means anything that can be observed. Yeah, anything that can be noted and experienced is considered an object. I know that's not a very poetic way of talking about life, a bunch of objects, including what arises in the mind and body as an object. But it is useful as a term to distinguish between that which is known and the knowing itself, which you could call the subjectivity, even though it's not a subject in the sense of like, well, if you look for the subject, you won't find an object there. You won't find something tangible that you can find, right? So, but it's sort of useful sometimes as a simplifying to point to there are objects that appear in awareness, including the breathing body. We can use these objects. Sometimes we say primary object of attention when talking about the breathing to help stabilize our own attending. But really, as we practice, we end up resting more in the subject and the subjectivity that allows this all to appear. That's what you could say, that's what we are on a more foundational level, is that, you can't find any object and you point to that, say, that's what I am. That you can't locate yourself in any one thing. Although we certainly do, unconsciously, and that leads to all kinds of distress and dis-ease and leads to our limited sense of identity that we kind of are functionally living inside of all the time. So I just wanted to mention that term, hopefully to clarify. When we talk about objects of attention, it's just anything that is perceived, anything that appears. And then we talk about the subjectivity or the subject, which is that which allows it all to be known. And of course, yeah. So that's one starter. Now I want to make a simple point, but I want to emphasize it. And that is the distinction, and I'm going to use a few examples of this that I think will be useful. The distinction between the direct experiencing of something and the story about it. When you experience the breath, it's not a story. It's not a narrative. All the thoughts that happen about it are thoughts that happen about it. And hopefully all of you who practice and have been practicing are starting to notice that distinction, the difference between the felt experience of what we call breathing and then the thoughts about it, about how well you're breathing or not, or what the quality of the breath is compared to yesterday, or about other kinds of breathing exercises you've learned or studied. That is the mentation level. And then there's the direct sensing. So as you practice, you're getting familiar with both of these. When you practice, you don't lose the story layer. That still happens, but it becomes much clearer which is which, and they happen together. Sometimes there's just the apprehending. And sometimes there's the apprehending and a commentary or a narrative or a story. So that's not just with the breathing, of course. That's true with all experience. Hear a sound. And then there's the liking or not liking it, or there's the story of my neighbors and how loud they are, or I wish I could have a moment's peace or whatever. There's the sound, and there's the story about it. Now, I'll tell you in a few minutes why this is important. I think most of you know. But this layer of the story is a huge part of what we're experiencing, is this narrative about the sound, the texture of the sound and the story about it. So that's true with feelings in the body. Yeah, there's the actual sensation, the pain in the knee, throb, throb, ache, ache, stab, stab. And then there's the story about it. You know, if I keep sitting here, I'll be injured. If I, this is this old injury and I've got to be careful with it. And actually, I'm not going to be able to do this tomorrow or that tomorrow, or, the story of the future of this situation with my knee. So the story layer, again, it's not bad. It's just different from the actual throb, throb, stab, stab, which happened, of course, wordlessly. That's just the actuality of this momentary experience. There's the tension in the jaw, just the felt tension or the tightness in the chest. There's the texture of the tightness, and then there's a story about it. I'm so closed. I'm so shut down. I'm protecting my heart. I've always been protecting my heart, and I need to open my heart anyway. I just want to make the distinction between the actual felt experience and the narrative layer, the story about it. So I hope as you practice, it's true with seeing too. Of course, you're seeing what's just appearing through the visual field, and then you have thoughts about what you see. So hopefully you are all really noticing both of these, and you're learning how to connect with directly this direct experience layer. And you're also learning how to observe or witness or include in awareness the story narrative layer, which is ebbing and flowing and moving and changing in all kinds of ways. It gets this angle and that angle, changing all the time. It's very important to be able to see that story layer and how it functions. Again, not bad, but we need to understand its nature. Yeah? And we also need to have a relationship to direct experiencing here and now. So as I've said before, but I think this is important to point out repeatedly, so much of your sense of how things are, including most of your mental distress, comes from the story layer. What's actually happening in the present moment in terms of the experience of what's here is usually much more simple and much more bearable and much more workable than the narrative layer. It's the psychological distress, the giant burden of what's appearing that comes in the story layer. And we want to be able to see that. The story of the future of this thing I'm experiencing right now, how long it's going to last. That's the story layer. And many of you are noticing that story of how long it's going to last. When the story is present, we experience that experience of that future. And then we come back to what's happening right now. I'm feeling scared. There's the direct feeling of or an unsettledness. So we want to see that. So much of the meaning layer, the meaning comes in the story. And again, that can be useful and interesting. So I'm a fan of storytelling. I enjoy stories, but we need to understand the nature of what is appearing in our own minds so we're not confused by it. So I want to give a few examples. So there's a story I heard, millions of years ago. That's a joke, but when I was young, I remember hearing the story. It's like a teaching story. Of course, it's not apocryphal, right? It happened exactly this way. And many of you may have heard it, but it illustrates a useful point about the story layer. And this is a story about a farmer in a generic location, but a long time ago. So I'm sure it was a specific location at one point. So this is a farmer who is also, of course, a wise farmer, because we need a wise farmer for our story. So here's the wise farmer, and one day his horse runs away. And all of his neighbors say, oh, that's really bad. That's bad luck. And the farmer, the wise farmer, says, it may be good, it may be bad. I don't know. So a few days later, his horse returns, and of course, he's bringing a herd of wild horses. So now the farmer's a rich farmer. He's got all these horses. And of course, his neighbors say, well, that's incredible, wonderful, good fortune. You know, this is terrific. And the wise farmer, of course, says, you know, it may be good, it may be bad. I don't know. And then some weeks later, his eldest son is it breaks his leg terribly, kind of permanent injury, trying to tame one of the horses. And of course, all his neighbors are saying, oh, this is terrible. You know, this is, you know, look what happened. Look at the result of this, you know, these horses coming. This is really bad. Of course, the farmer says, it may be good, it may be bad, and I don't know. And then, you know, some months later, the army comes through, and they're conscripting people. And of course, they can't take, you know, for one of these battles in which, you know, everybody is fodder. And so, of course, this his son can't go. And so the story could go on and on, but I think you get the point. Okay? And what is the point? The point is that we are telling the story of good and bad, and we tell it we have a very narrow window for it. We tell it very quickly, is my point. We tell it very quickly in the moment, and we believe it the way it gets constructed. So it's not to say that it's good or bad or not good or bad, right? This isn't kind of some Pollyanna story, you know, or message. But really, it's just a pointer to look at how quickly we do this thing of, you know, this is bad. And it happens it happens right away. Right? And if you look at your own life and you look at all of these things that you've gone through, it's a much more complex story, isn't it? What you thought was good, what you thought was bad, right? Those are too simple. I don't even know if I understand what this word is, but I think it's the right word. Heuristics. It's too simple as a framing. It doesn't capture the complexity of experience and the complexity of causality, yeah, or the unfolding of conditions, and how multidimensional that is. And it's just to point to how we make a story and we believe it. The story is way too simplified, and it's often wrong. When you look from a broader perspective, again, at your own life, the things that seem good and bad in the moment, they are part of something that's much more complicated. That's certainly true in my life. So the point here is just, we want to notice the story layer, because that's happening all day for you. You're deciding what is, you know, a tragedy and what's a success very quickly. You're probably deciding too quickly. And you may be deciding that based on just one piece of news you take in at a given time. We're in relationship to these streams of stories as well. And it's very easy unconsciously to be popping up and down based on just a piece of information right now. Again, it's not that you shouldn't take in information, but these stories of good and bad. So the experience you have of going up and down through the day, this is the experience of being in stories. Stories go up and down. But from the standpoint of experience doesn't go up and down. There are experience is momentary. It's pleasant. There's unpleasant. It's painful moment. Yeah. But that's different. That's there's a textures of experience, but that's very different than up and down. The up and down is the story layer. It's not that you should get rid of it, but we need to know, to observe this aspect of our experience because it's so pervasive, because it's such a huge part of how we experience life. And it's completely, usually, unexamined as a process. We're usually trying to decide, is this story true or not? Just a particular one. We don't see the process of story making. Okay. So that's just one example of the, that story of the farmer. And another story dimension that you can notice through the day, and this is one I referenced a few weeks ago, I think it's good to revisit, is should and shouldn't. It's a variation on the same thing. Okay? We make should and shouldn't all day long. And that is another unexamined construct, which is it's if you look at it, it's quite unhelpful. All the things that shouldn't happen is basically you making a story that argues with reality. Who's going to win that argument? Your story of what shouldn't be happening or reality? No, this is happening. And if you pay close attention, you'll notice that it's the should part that makes you crazy. It's the should part that gets you really ramped up and agitated. And you might notice in the moments where the should part is not appearing, or the shouldn't part isn't appearing. Of course, should and shouldn't are two sides of the same thing. It's the should thing will get you all ramped up, and the shouldn't thing will get you all ramped up and crazy. So notice when the should and shouldn't isn't there, and sometimes it's not. Experience is just much more matter of fact. It doesn't mean you don't take action. It just means you don't have that layer of just intense agitation about it. And you can notice that with your own children. When you have a should about what they should be doing, right now everybody's trying to homeschool their kids. Kids should pay attention on Zoom when their classroom teacher is presenting a lesson. How's that story going for you? How's that correlating with reality? Probably not that, unless probably not that well. Right? So that should, it's just made up. Who made that up? Well, you made it up. And when you have that story, whether it's should or shouldn't with your children, the agitation will predominate because it's not the way it's supposed to be. Right? You made up how it's supposed to be, but it's not that way. And so you get ramped up and agitated. When you're not making should and shouldn't, you still have to deal with what do we do now? This is school happening this way, and we still have to figure out what to do, but it has a different quality. That twist in the mind, that ramped up agitation, is not present. So it's not that you need to make should and shouldn't go away, but I want you to watch it. Watch it carefully. Watch it about what's happening in the world, which is just the world is your house and the world is what's outside of it. Watch how you relate to should and shouldn't about public figures. You're making up the should and shouldn't about your family members, what they should and shouldn't do. No, they're going to do exactly what they're doing. And your should is just a made up thing to drive you crazy. It's a story you have. Again, we're all running this program of should and shouldn't, but we need to examine it. We need to see it for what it is. It is not a useful lens on life. Right? Those two categories. It just doesn't help at all. Right? It doesn't help us address suffering or address what needs to be addressed with a clear mind. And it just leads to incredible levels of reactivity. So there's another story you can watch. There's so many. We could go on and on, but I'll just maybe name one more, that you can also look out for. Well, anyway, just watch your stories, right? What you can and can't do is also a story, yeah, that you make up. We watch kids do that. I can't do it. It's just like, oh, it's just a thought that arose in the moment. Okay. But another big one is comparing, and comparing is different than, seeing contrasts. Comparing is the sense of like, mostly in relation to yourself, about being better than or less than. At least that's the place I'd encourage you to look at it first, about you being better than or worse than or even equal to. That's another experience that is completely based in story. It's completely concept created. And so you feel yourself, high and low and equal through the day in different interactions, related to different people who are real or imagined, related to yourself and your imagined selves. This comparing. And it's a huge part of how we are existing. And it exists only in thinking. And it's a huge part of what prevents us from being completely as we are. Or I should say, complete as we are in this moment. Yeah, that story of comparing yourself to who you could be, comparing yourself to who you were, comparing yourself to your imagination of somebody else, right? Or your idea of somebody else. So watch this. Don't make it go away. You probably won't be able to, just as the other ones. Just watch this story layer of comparing. And like all the others, notice when it's not present. Notice when there isn't a comparing story. And notice what this is like without the story. There's so many other layers of this, right? I said that we locate ourselves as a story. And as we start to inhabit this subjectivity itself, as we start to inhabit is even the wrong word, as we start to relax into beingness itself, beingness that includes, as I was saying earlier, just includes the world as it appears, this world, this world, this world. It's all the world as it's appearing. As we start to rest and relax back into what we are here, that's not based in a momentary thought or story or a momentary sensation or experience. The dependence on the story layer just really changes. But we need to, as part of that, in order to not be entranced and totally believing our stories, we need to see what they are. More importantly, we need to see how they function to affect our experience of things. And as we see this more and more clearly, the seeing, of course, is you seeing it. As we see it more clearly, we can't help but not believe it as much. Yeah, to not be completely bought in to the story of the moment. Just as you're not going to be bought into the stories that are being told to you when you see what they are, if they're unreliable or not a good way of orienting, not the most useful way of orienting. So, I think that's enough of my stories for now. If I think of something else, I will include it. But I'm going to now move to some of the Q&A. And I'm going to look at some of your questions. So Ellen, I think this is an interesting question you have. I'm going to, wait, I have to get to the participants. I'm going to unmute you or allow you to talk. And if you would like to ask it live, that'd be wonderful. Do you want to ask your question, Ellen?
Yes, I'm here.
Wonderful. Hi.
Wonderful. So I recently had the realization, maybe without over dramatizing, a kind of epiphany, that when my thoughts wander, something I had always thought of as a failing, my consciousness of their wandering is in fact part of awareness. And that it's that awareness that brings me back to my breath until my thoughts wander again. So I talked about this a little bit with the Monday group that is the spinoff from our latest intensive.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to ask you if you could talk about whether or not this notion of awareness works, and how, yet again, to include the rising up of these thoughts into meditation.
It's a beautiful comment you're making, Ellen. And I think you don't need me to talk about it. I don't think it's a concept you're describing. I think it's what you're noting. You're observing this. You're noticing that it's like this. Yeah? You're noticing, oh, something is aware of this, what I call my mind wandering. Something is aware of me deciding to come back to my breath. What is that? And you're kind of like on to, you're kind of like when you're on to something, you're just like, oh, you're noticing, oh, what is this that's here? We say, my mind wandered. Where did it go? Who noticed that? So I don't want to say anything more. I think you're on, I just accept to kind of affirm your own knowing and what you're noticing. I think that's exciting.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. It's an important point. Okay, let me go back for a moment. So here's one I think I can just respond to. It says, during the meditation, I tend to feel very sleepy and doze on and off. Is this normal? And am I meditating or just relaxing? Actually, let me unmute you so we can dialogue a little bit about that anyway. Sandra. Let's see. Are you there, Sandra? Do you want to say anything more about that, or?
Hi, Will.
Hi.
Hi. No, pretty much to the point, I guess. I noticed today and some other times, sometimes I lay down, and then I noticed that I'm paying attention to the breath, the breathing, and I'm there. And then today I was feeling kind of dozing off for some reason. So coming in and out and keep reminding myself to come back. And it's the same when I lay down. So I'm thinking, am I just too tired? Or that's the way how it's going to be for now.
So does that happen when you're sitting also and when you're laying down?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Yeah, so sleepiness is a huge part of what people experience in meditation. And I don't know how long you've been at this, but you may be tired, a lot of people are underslept, and
yeah.
so that may be something, but then you're overtired and you still need to practice, of course, right? And
Yeah.
so if you can, of course, get more, it's a silly thing to tell people, because if you could get more sleep, you would, right? So I'm not going to tell you to get more sleep. But, so what I would say is this. I'd say there are ways of waking up the mind a little bit, right? One is to leave your eyes open when you're practicing.
Yeah.
And do the practice with your eyes open. It's harder to doze, and you just leave the eyes open to let in light, but let the gaze be soft. And you can do the whole practice the way we've described it. You can also practice standing. It's much harder to fall asleep standing. Some part of your brain stem is going to kind of keep you on, keep you awake, right? So that's another way you can practice. Now, for those of you, if you've been at this for a little while and you're interested.
Yes, I have.
Okay. So then there are two other layers. One is you can bring more interest to noticing the details of whatever you're paying attention to. Yeah. And sometimes people are interested in what their mind, some people, it's like you want to understand what's happening in the mind, but you're paying attention to the breathing and you're not that motivated to do it. So sometimes if you're really curious about what your mind is doing, you can actually do a little bit of what seems to be more advanced practice, which is just like watch the mind. And if you're interested, the interest can be enough to keep you awake. I'm going to watch and see what happens here. How does it work? What appears? How do thoughts come and go? What are thoughts? So that kind of interest can really wake up the attention. Similarly, I sometimes say, okay, let yourself be as sleepy as you want, but see if you can watch yourself fall asleep.
Okay.
Because awareness can actually do that. You can watch yourself go out. You can watch the mind get very sleepy, and that which is aware of the sleepy mind is not sleepy. So I'm just telling you a few things to try to pique your interest.
Okay, well, thanks.
And so you can try all those things and practice with them. And then also, if you end up sleeping during meditation, it's okay. It could be just relaxing and you could enjoy it. So you get sleep during meditation. That sounds nice too.
Yeah, but I do have times that I'm aware that of what's going on in my mind and my stories, and
okay.
But other times, as I say, I just to try it, I guess.
Yeah. Well, then you
Just
also
have to keep trying.
keep trying, but also be gentle with yourself, right? It's sort of like, if you're very tired, also paying attention to what time of day you practice could be helpful. I tend to encourage people, practice when you have the most energy and interest.
Yeah.
Often people reserve the meditation for the time they're the least alert.
Yes,
I
at
say
the end of the day.
Anything you want to really train in, where you really want to develop it, you want to practice it like when you have your mind with you,
Okay.
So that's another suggestion.
Well, thanks for all the tips.
Oh, yeah, you're so welcome. Thank you.
Thank
It's nice to talk with you. Okay. So let's keep moving on. This is an interesting one too. They're all good. All these questions are great. Let's see. Okay. Christopher, do you want to ask your here, I'm gonna Christopher. Yeah. Christopher, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah, sure.
Great.
First of all, thank you for your talk today. It really resonated with me.
Hey, you're welcome.
So it's going to be a little scattered, but I come from a Catholic upbringing, and I think when I came into learning about mindfulness, it really resonated with me, and I just ate it up. And now I'm getting more towards like the capital B Buddhism.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to farther my practice, and I'm running into, I'm learning about the 5 hindrances, and
Mm-hmm.
I hear doubt as one of them. And
Yeah.
my mind goes, well, isn't like a healthy doubt good? You know, like
Mm-hmm.
not to question anything in Catholicism. And now I'm starting to hear these words in Buddhism, and then I hear conviction, you know, and there was a question posed to me: do I believe Buddha was real and that Buddha said what he said he did, or did what he said he did?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I struggled with that question because I couldn't say 100% behind it, you know, yes, he did. And
Yeah. Who can? Who could? I guess you could, but you know, you wouldn't know, right? You'd be guessing.
yeah. And so I hear words like conviction and then a hindrance being doubt, and I get some concern. I start to kind of bottle up, and I'm like, I don't like those words. And
Yeah.
is that not okay to have? And is it okay for me to practice Buddhism but not fully, I don't know, with 100%? It's hard to explain.
No, you're explaining it very well. I think it's, you know, I think I get what you're saying, and that's important what you're talking about. You know, this is a big topic. So I think what I'm going to do is just talk about you rather than talk about the big topic, yeah, because you know, you have a critical mind, and you don't want to just, you know, you actually can't join something that you just are asked to buy into as like a belief system. I can hear that in your, you know, you won't let yourself do that. And I think that's totally fine and even pretty wise. you know, something resonates with you about the practice itself. And then along with that comes a lot of words. And I will just say that, you know, you don't have to buy anything to do the practice, you know, and 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 so if you're, you know, the Buddha is really awareness. You know, we think, oh, the Buddha is some historical figure in time, and maybe the Buddha was some historical figure. But again, as you said, you don't know that. There are a lot of stories in the text. Do you take them literally or do you take them metaphorically? And people differ on this. Right? I think what you should do, and yet you hear and you've read about faith as being like one of the spiritual powers, like that's really important, the faith in terms of the path. And I just want to give you a way of thinking about that might be different than what you expect, okay? And that way of thinking about faith is, it's sort of, you need enough faith to apply the method. And the faith is what? That this method does something useful. And I'd say the method is like the teaching or the practice, right? You already have that much faith because it resonated with you and you started applying it. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. That's enough. Now, you should let your own experience be the proximate cause of more, you know, the faith will come from your own learning and experience. And I'm guessing that as you deepen in the practice, that will increase. Now, where you think you're supposed to believe something on the dotted line, I would say, don't believe it on the dotted line. Find out for yourself. That's really in the spirit of the Buddha's teaching. There's a whole sutta you can look up called the Kalama Sutta, Kalama. And it's the Buddha's like, it's basically the Buddha's like declaration of independence. It's like saying you have to find out for yourself. It's pretty radical, actually, for a teacher at the time, saying don't believe something based on tradition. Don't believe something because somebody who's wise looking said it. Don't believe something because other people believe it. don't believe something because people have been doing it for a long time. Saying, find out for yourself. That's a very core aspect of the Buddhist teaching. Okay? So I think that's very in line with the spirit you're describing. Now, doubt as a hindrance means, so it's good to have an inquiring mind, and I think a critical mind. That you can actually apply that to what I was talking about earlier today, which is don't believe everything you think. Mm-hmm. Don't believe what anybody says to you. Don't even believe what you say to yourself. Look at it directly and see if it's true. So that's a kind of critical faculty, right? It's like you're not just buying it. And so where doubt is a hindrance is it's basically as you're practicing awareness, when doubt arises, you want to be able to see it as doubt. That makes sense? Because doubt is a hindrance, what its function is, it's to take you out of awareness. Because as soon as you start doubting what you're doing and you don't see it as a state of mind, you then just are thinking about stuff and you forget to practice. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's what that teaching is about doubt as a hindrance. It's not saying like you should just be some gullible schmo who believes everything that you're told, and like just, oh, I accept it, sure. That is not a recipe for waking up.
Yeah.
Right? No, it's not. So, no, but it's talking about how when doubt arises, because that happens for everybody when things get hard. You're practicing, you're sitting with, the mind going crazy and you're having all kinds of difficult emotions and states and you're practicing with it. It's very easy to think like, this stuff doesn't make sense. It's not really working for me, who made this up anyway? Of course, those are fine thoughts to have outside of when you're practicing. And you can examine them. Like, does this teacher, you can look at it. But while you're practicing, you want to see doubt as a mind state when it appears.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Uh-huh.
That's enough. So you take your critical faculty and fold it into your practicing. Mm-hmm. Some of the teachings, I'll just say this from my personal experience, I read some of the teachings in the texts and I'll say to myself, I don't believe the Buddha said it that way. Mm-hmm. And it's only not because I know what the Buddha said, but because there are certain things I read where, the texts are put together, they're compiled. It's like, this doesn't seem like it fits. This seems, there are pieces in there like that. Now, who am I going to trust? Some people might say I'm trusting the wrong thing. But anyway, I take the teachings and explore them in your experience. That's where it's most useful. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. If this is something, and you're like I said, you're not going to let yourself sign up for another thing you just have to believe in. And I don't think you should. We want you to be independent in practicing, which means it's your practice. Yeah. Because from the standpoint of a more ultimate level, your own awareness is the Buddha. Your body is the body of the teachings. And so your job is to use your Buddha mind to discover what is true here and now. And that takes all this ancient stuff and it locates it right here. It is located right here. And we can use these texts as pointers, as supports for learning and discovering new aspects, or it's like, oh, I hadn't paid attention to that aspect of experience. I'm going to. But not to locate it in some other person or even some other place. This Dhamma, this teaching is here and now. And this Buddha we're talking about is here and now and nowhere else. All right?
Thank you.
Is that too much of I'm sorry, that was a little polemical.
No, there's definitely some things I can apply there. And then also the suggestion to read, here in a few words, Charter of Free Inquiry.
Yeah.
Charter of Free Inquiry. So that's great.
That resonates.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. That sounds good. Well, nice to chat with you, Christopher. All right. This makes me want to read something that I was actually going to read earlier, but I want to read it to all of you. And this gives you a sense. I'm guessing you can still see me. Yeah. This gives you a sense of how to practice with, how to really include what the mind is doing as relates to this doubting in your practicing. And this is part of basic meditation instructions from Mahasi Sayadaw, who was the teacher. He was this, popularizer in Burma of teaching real meditation, like serious meditation to lay people. And he would do that on like retreats and got a lot of lay people practicing. He was also the teacher of my teacher in Burma, Sayadaw U Pandita. So this is from part 4 of his little teachings, and it's about being aware of the mind. So he uses the term noting, which for knowing. So just to say, anytime you hear the word noting in here, you can think knowing. So this is called basic exercise 4. You can just listen. It says, up to this point, you have devoted quite some time to the training course. You might begin to feel lazy, thinking that you've made inadequate progress. Have any of you felt that way ever when you're practicing? I'm sure you have. It says, by no means give up. Simply note the fact lazy. Note means know. So you know that you're thinking lazy. Before you gain sufficient strength and attention, concentration, and insight, you may doubt the correctness or usefulness of this method of training. In such a circumstance, turn to the contemplation of the thought, doubtful. Do you anticipate or wish for good results? If so, make such thoughts the subject of your contemplation, anticipating or wishing. Are you attempting to recall the manner in which the training was conducted up to this point? Yes? Then take up the contemplation on recollecting. Are there occasions when you examine the object of contemplation in order to determine whether it is mind or matter? If so, then be aware of examining. Do you regret that there's no improvement in your contemplation? If so, attend to the feeling of regret. Conversely, are you happy that your contemplation is improving? If you are, then contemplate the feeling of being happy. This is the way in which you make a mental note of every item of mental behavior as it occurs. Means this is the way in which you know every item of mental behavior as it occurs. If there are no intervening thoughts, anyway. Yeah, it goes on. But I wanted to read that to you so that you could just hear, and of course, maybe know that I didn't make it up either, how each one of those mental moves, so it's like, oh, I'm going to apply the instructions and experiment and examine whether this is this or that. And the awareness knows, oh, I'm doing this thing, I'm examining. If you're trying to remember the instructions, he doesn't say, go think about the instructions and come back. He says, notice that you're recollecting. If you're doubting, like, am I doing this right? Is this going anywhere? You're aware of doubting. If you're feeling good about your progress and you're saying like, oh yeah, I'm really meditating here. Yeah, you're aware of that. So you see, this is a ruthless application of one thing, this simple wakefulness that is knowing experience. And each of these mental moves are so compelling to just go and get caught up in them. Is this practice working or not working? How am I doing? Let me just check it out. Let me pop out and think about it. I want to notice that too. Yeah? So that all of this mind content starts to just become part of the field of experience. And we're not taken out by it. It's particularly doubt. Okay. So here's a question from Pamela, and I'm not sure if I can unmute you. I'll try though. I have a question about story. I notice I rehearse the irritating experience, story, to come home and share with my partner. I could see it and wondered if I just trusted the present moment, would I be interesting enough without the story? It feels like ego's hold telling me I won't be interesting without the story. Now, Pamela, I'm not sure I remember you had trouble unmuting last time, but I'm going to just see if I can, because that sounds like that's an interesting comment. Let's see. Pamela, can you,
Yeah, can you hear me?
oh yeah.
Oh, cool. I think it might boil down, the question might boil down to who would I be without my story?
Mm-hmm.
It's really, and I feel like having confronted that a couple times in the last week, I feel a little scared.
Yeah.
And also a little grief stricken,
Hmm.
which is kind of interesting to me too.
What is that experience like?
Well, I think I feel really sad. Like, who would I be without my story, and how attached?
Hmm.
You know, when my daughter was little, the next door neighbor had a daughter who's 5 years older. And she always said, if I want to go see Samantha, I have to bring something to her. Otherwise, she won't be interested in me.
Hmm.
And I feel like that's the
Yeah.
same thing sometimes, you know.
Yeah.
It's just so, maybe I want to use the word ubiquitous. Like the narrative is just almost non-relenting. So I'm just curious about how to address that, because I have felt really sad.
Yeah.
You know, and maybe not in the way that I don't think, maybe it's doubt in the way of one of the hindrances, but maybe it is, you know, doubt that the present moment could be enough and that I would be enough in it.
That you would be enough. Yeah. I mean, it's wonderful just to say that you're aware of the ubiquity of that story making, and that you can be aware that there's a kind of like a fear lurking there, you know, that without it, you won't be enough. And I just think that to me is just a sign of where you are in the practice. And I think that's a very rich place to be, even though it's unsettling. Yeah. That's actually, it takes something for awareness to arrive at that point where you can see both the kind of like relentlessness of this dimension and you're feeling into the possibility already of not being just located in that. And right now you're experiencing it as a lack. Right?
Yeah.
And some of that is just our conditioning from forever.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Some of that deep feelings like, oh, there's not enough. I'm not enough. There's not. And so all I would say to you is just stay with the fear feeling, you know, just stay present with that space that right now what's coming into it is like almost like it's like, oh no, what if there's nothing here?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And if you can just stay in that place, I think you will discover something very important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because you include that. Yeah. And that is the basic fear for so many. It's this basic fear that without this constructedness, I'm not going to be interesting. Without this shtick or this story. Yeah. And the truth is, it's exactly the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
It's this story that is old and boring, that's repetitive, and it's always in this exchange currency. And yet when you are present, you are vivid and open, and there's just And there's possibility and newness, and you can see, and things come out of you and you don't know what they're going to be. However, there's an interim, and it just may be moments of an interim. It's like, will you dare to let yourself stay in the feeling of void, in that moment of not knowing what's going to come and not knowing that anything will? Because I think that's such a rich and fertile place. That's the place where people sometimes they don't embrace that in practice. We want you to embrace that so that you can allow what is to move through you. Yeah. And that's the basic fear that keeps people running back to the construct. And and I really know that territory too. So I want to just encourage you, stay with it. I don't think you will be disappointed. So many of you have come to that kind of place where the old thing is kind of breaking down. It's not compelling really for you, and that you're not actually comfortable in some new way of being yet. That is a very rich liminal space. Yeah. And it's the beginning of really a new life, new relationship to what you are. And that basic construction around story, it does not have room for enoughness. Enoughness is in being. Enoughness is in non-story. It's only story that even makes enough and not enough. Right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
That's right. Without it, we don't have enough and not enough. We just have this. So anyway, I think that's a really wonderful thing you're noticing. And so you can challenge, I really encourage you to not go back.
Yeah. It feels like right now in this liminal space, very vulnerable.
Yeah, it's the most vulnerable. It's so tender. It's so tender to not be in the shell or the construct. And from this tenderness comes life, the aliveness that you are. And it is very vulnerable, because you're seeing that story is not vulnerable, right? The story is the offering of what is known, or the kind of the solid, or the past.
Yeah. Thank you, Will.
Thank you, Pamela. Thank you so much. It's nice to chat with you. Okay, I think there are so many wonderful questions, and I can't get to all of them. And so maybe we can get to some of them next time. So let's just, maybe for tonight, we'll say that's enough, and we'll formally close for this evening. Again, I hope that you will continue to let this life can appear within this subjectivity, which it's already happening, but just to notice it and to abide in this as this, and include and include and include. Okay. And of course, to watch and see if you can just investigate some of what I was talking about tonight in your own experience. Again, if you want to, donate and support this offering, you can do that on the sundaysangha.net website, and we have a Venmo link there and a PayPal link there. And I thank you for your support and for your support just in practicing as well. So why don't we just sit together for a few moments, and we'll kind of formally close. So may each of us, and in our own way, continue to have our own wakefulness, our own awareness, our own subjectivity be our place of reference. And may we continue to look deeply into the nature of experience, our own experience. And may we be willing to see things as they are. And may our own clear seeing free us. And may this be for the benefit not only of ourselves, but also for all beings everywhere. So thank you all. Thank you for your practice and your questions and the kind of openness and directness of your questions and your inquiry. And we were about 150 of us on tonight, give or take, at different times. And I wish you well, and I'll see you soon.